Hello, our topic is how to progress houses. This is a really important topic because most of us in the Western world use secondary progressions. We use them because they work. I use them, they're fantastic. We're able to predict major events, major changes in the person's life, and there's one really big problem with secondary progressions, which is we don't agree about how to progress the houses. We know how to progress the planets, but some disagreement about how to progress the houses. And in this video, I think I can resolve a lot of the confusion, a lot of the arguments, different points of view, and we come up with a new system of houses called Fractal Progressed Houses that really make sense. They also help explain how primary directions, a method used in the Middle Ages, how they work. It pulls all of this together. It's very exciting to synthesize all this information and see our way through a tangle of different ideas. So let me show this to you. This will get a little bit technical at certain points. I'll try to not get too technical and drive home this main point that we really want to know how to progress houses, and we found a way that makes sense. Okay, so let's dig into this. First, a quick review of what secondary progressions are. They're often called day for a year progressions, and the idea is that for each year of actual life, we have an internal clock that moves only one day. That's why it's called day for a year. The idea is even mentioned in the Bible. For each year of life will be as a day. Even Vettius Valens gave a hint of this, early astrologer, well, almost 2,000 years ago. But it didn't get really revived and picked up until more recent, more modern times, this idea that a day equals a year. And to give you an idea of what this looks like, let's use somebody's chart. We'll use this singer, Justin Timberlake. Here's his birth chart. And the sun happens to be at 12 Aquarius 04, moon at 24 Sagittarius 42. He was born on January 31st, 1981 at 6:30 p.m. in Memphis, Tennessee. And the Greenwich Mean Time, also known as Universal Time, is 0 hours 30 minutes the next day of February 1st. So we can bring up an ephemeris. An ephemeris is simply a table of planetary positions for the time that Justin Timberlake was born, February 1st, 1981 at 0 hours 30 minutes GMT. And this particular software, the Sirius software and the Kepler software also does it, allows you to set the time for the ephemeris, which is wonderful because now I see the positions for Justin Timberlake. There they are. There's the sun at 12 Aquarius 04, moon at 24 Sagittarius 42, all of the positions in his chart, and here are the progressed positions. So we do not even need to calculate a progressed chart. We can just look at an ephemeris, one that allows us to set the time to the time the person was born, and the next day are the positions when he's 1 year old, and the following day 2 years old, 3 years old, and we can see the movement of these progressed planets throughout the person's life. So it's a very simple idea, and it works. When this progressed sun is conjunct a natal planet, something symbolized by the meanings of those planets tends to happen. It's really fantastic. What's not so fantastic is we do not agree about how to progress the houses. Well, if a day equals a year, then it should be very simple how to progress the houses. How far do the houses move in a day? Well, let's see. Let's take a chart. Okay, here's Justin Timberlake. He has 25 Leo 39 rising. If I go into the time adjust, I'm in the Sirius 3.0 software, and let's move just 4 minutes. How far will the houses move in 4 minutes? Probably most of you know. I'll hit the right arrow and it will go from about 25.5 Leo on the ascendant to 26.5 Leo. Every 4 minutes the house cusps move 1 degree. We all know this. This amounts to 1 sign every 2 hours. And what happens in a whole day? Let's try 1 day. In 1 day, the ascendant will move from 25.5 Leo. Let me move forward 1 day to 26.5 Leo. So what has happened in 1 day, the house cusps move around the entire zodiac plus 1 degree, right? Are we clear? because this is the thing that's confused people about progressing houses for decades and even up until now. But it's very simple. Houses move 1 degree every 4 minutes, which equals 1 sign, in other words 30 degrees in 2 hours, and it's 361 degrees. They move around the circle plus 1 degree in a day. Excuse me, sorry. So if a day equals a year, how far does the ascendant move in 1 year of life? I just said it, 361 degrees. Well, 361 degrees is very close to 365 days. Therefore, drum roll, dramatic statement, how fast do the progressed houses move? 1 degree a day. I just explained it. If that now has confused you, just listen to this video again, and it should convince you that the progressed houses move 1 degree a day. But what we have done in astrology is we don't like that they move 1 degree a day. They move 1 degree a day, but we don't like that. And I'll show you in a few minutes why we don't like it. And we force the houses by using fudge formulas, by making up all kinds of weird ideas. We try to force the houses to move 1 degree a year. And this is the heart of the problem with progressed houses. Very simply stated, the progressed houses actually move 1 degree in 4 minutes, which in real time, and by progression, where a day equals a year, the progressed houses are moving 1 degree a day and 361 degrees a year. So, state that shortly, the actual progressed houses move 1 degree a day, but astrologers prefer that they move 1 degree a year. And I'll explain why they wish that they moved 1 degree a year, even though they don't. And just to show you on a biwheel, here's again Justin Timberlake's natal chart on the inner ring of a biwheel. His progressed chart for May 25, 2018 on the outside. He's about 37 years old. The sun has moved from natal position of 12 Aquarius to a progressed position of 19 Pisces. It's moved 37 degrees as we expected. That makes perfect sense. The sun moves 1 degree a day, which is a year of life. Perfect. The sun is moving 1 degree a year by progression. And here's the ascendant, 25 Leo when he was born, moved 31 degrees to 26 Virgo over those 37 years. So we astrologers have worked out a formula where the progressed ascendants moving very roughly about 1 degree a year, in this case a little bit less, only 31 degrees in 37 years, but very roughly about 1 degree a year of life, which the progressed ascendant really does not move 1 degree a year of life, but we've used a fudge formula. We made up another formula rather than a day equals a year to force the ascendant to move 1 degree a year of life. So the bottom line is that we astrologers say that secondary progressions are based on the idea that a day equals a year, but that's only true for the planets. For the houses, we use a different idea. Let me say that again. In astrology, we often say, what is the idea of secondary progressions? The answer is, it's based on the idea that a day equals a year. Actually, that's only true for the planets. When we progress the houses, we do not use the idea that a day equals a year. We use it only for the planets, because if we used it for the houses, they would be moving 1 degree a day, not 1 degree a year. So we use a different formula for the houses. And people don't know what formula to use, so different people use different formulas, so we have a mess. We don't really know how to progress the houses. Now, why do we break this rule? The reason we break this rule is because if we look at Justin Timberlake's chart, let me show you why we break the rule and why we want the houses to move 1 degree a year of life. This is just to illustrate the point. You can get hundreds of examples of this. It works so well so often. The distance from Justin Timberlake's fourth house cusp, which is one of the angular cusps, one of the important ones, to his moon is 33 degrees 41 minutes. If we say that a degree equals a year, then when Justin Timberlake is about 33 years old and 8 months, about 33 and 2/3 years old, he should have a moon fourth house cusp event, and he does. His first child is born. This is why astrologers want the house cusps to move 1 degree a year, because events often happen that correspond with moving the cusps 1 degree a year of life. But secondary progressions do not move the cusps 1 degree a year of life. They only move it 1 degree per day of life. So we made up a different formula for the houses. The big question is, what should that formula be? Because our observation says they're moving 1 degree, there must be a formula. And some people say, well, it's just 1 degree is a year. Very simple. Other people say use the solar arc, which is about a degree, and that works extremely well. And some people have used this idea called Naibod in RA. So let me show you what I'm talking about in the software. Here's Justin Timberlake's chart. If I'm in the series 3.0, if I select progression, down here are the methods for progressing houses. I can use time, mean sun, solar arc, Naibod and RA, quotidian, blah, blah, blah. And at the bottom, we've added a new one called Fractal House. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that the best system to select for your progressed chart is Fractal House. That's the one to select. The one that most people are using now is Naibod and RA. This is the one most people use. But the Fractal House will give you similar results to the Naibod and RA, and I think that's why people have used Naibod and RA. A big reason is because they work fairly well. The event will occur within 6 months. But if you use Fractal House, it'll be slightly different and more accurate. How different? If a person is 30 years old, the dates will be a month earlier. If the person is 60 years old, it'll be 2 months earlier. So by Fractal House, the dates of the progressed to natal aspects are happening a little bit earlier, and that's more accurate. Okay? So I'm telling you where we're headed with this. Where we're headed with this is that astrologers have different ways to progress houses. Most use Naibod and RA. Some use solar arc. And I think Fractal House is the correct one. And it will give results slightly different than Naibod. Not that slight. Suppose a person's elderly, like 90 years old. Now it's 3 months different. Everything's happening by progression of the houses about 3 months earlier. It's still not too radically different from what you calculate in Naibod RA, but it's going to make your timing of your forecast more precise and more accurate. Okay. So, again, looking at Justin Timberlake's chart, why do we make up a new formula for the progressed houses? Because we see over and over and over again events happening, changes in life happening when the planets are about 1 degree per year from life from the cusps. Secondary progressions will not produce that for us, so we make up a new formula to do it. Okay. So, why is Naibod and RA so popular? Well, one reason is it works pretty well. It's very close in calculation to the fractal progressed houses, as I just mentioned. Another reason is it matches the results you get if you calculate charts by hand. Sometimes we call this the ancient BC days before computers, when people calculated by hand and they calculated the progression for the date of birth only. You'll get a result that matches Naibod and RA. That makes some of the old timers who've done it by hand feel comfortable with Naibod and RA. Another reason is it's the default selection. Many programs default to Naibod and RA. So a lot of people don't know there are these choices, and that's what the software produces. Another reason why people use Naibod and RA is that the only real serious alternative is Solar Arc, and a lot of people don't feel attracted to using that, even though the Solar Arc works extremely well. So what else are you going to use? And Naibod works pretty well, so it looks like the thing to use. But the Fractal Progressed Houses are going to give you similar results to the Naibod and RA, more precise, more accurate, and you do not have to introduce a new formula. You can just use day equals a year. Also, this is interesting. Even though Naibod and RA works reasonably well, and I think that's because the dates are close to the dates you get with Fractal Progressed Houses, two astrologers did a detailed research comparing dates of events and for famous people, comparing Naibod and RA with Solar Arc, and both of them independently came up with the same exact result, which is they found the Solar Arc works better than the Naibod and RA, and this keeps the debate going. So Zip Dobbins and Robert Blaschke, in their books, and Blaschke also wrote many articles and gave lectures about this, how he found that the Solar Arc works better. What's impressive about the work of Dobbins and Blaschke is they documented in great detail their findings. So we have these different ideas. Again, what I'm going to conclude, Solar Arc works. That's why Blaschke and Dobbins found that it worked, because it works. They found that the Naibod did not work as well because the timing of Naibod gets increasingly inaccurate the older the person gets. If they knew about the Fractal Progressed Houses, which didn't exist when they wrote their books, I think they would have found that it also worked well. Both Solar Arc and Fractal Progressed Houses work. In other words, they will time well. The dates that show up for the progressed houses to natal planet aspects will correlate very well with major events and changes in the person's life. Okay, now the Naibod in RA, just so you know, is based on using the average speed of the sun. So you have to introduce an idea other than a day equals a year. You have to introduce this mean speed of the sun, and why you would use that is not clear, but it seems to work, and it fits the manual calculation, so people have used it. Again, with Fractal Progressed Houses, it does not require introducing another concept like mean motion of the sun. We only use the day equals a year, and we use it in a fractal way, which I'll explain in a moment. So the idea of the Fractal Progressed Houses, number one, a day after birth equals a year of life, period. That's all there is to it. Number two, that spin of the Earth on its axis in one day resonates with this spin, you could call it, the revolution of the Earth around the Sun. There are two forms of spin that are synchronized with each other. It's very interesting that spin is one of the three fundamental properties of subatomic particles. There's charge, mass, and spin. Spin is a fundamental property of life, and if we guess that these different levels of spin are resonating with each other, we in fact have a day equals a year. It's basically saying these two levels of spin of the Earth on its axis and the Earth around the Sun are resonating. They're like fractal levels of spin. They are spin at different levels. So a day equals a year concept is the fundamental principle. It's kind of a beautiful idea. It fits in with physics. It fits in with a lot of history of in the Bible, and it's just a very appealing idea. And it's nice that we can just use that idea that a day equals a year in a fractal way, which means we apply the day equals a year formula on itself, and then we obtain fractal progressed houses. And at the bottom of this slide I have the formula. The formula, the right side of the formula says a day equals a year. That's the principle of secondary progressions. a day equals a year. Well, think about it. If a day equals a year, then I could erase day here and replace year. I could treat the day as a year and find out how much time there is that would be the equivalent of a day to this year. So in other words, I take 1/365th of a year, actually 1/365.25. I'll just say 1/365th of a year is a day. 1/365th of a day is 4 minutes. So therefore 4 minutes is to a day as a day equals a year. And this day is a year, so this 4 minutes is a day. So you can think about that, and all we're saying is that a day equals a year, and you apply it consistently, and therefore, if A equals B and B equals C, A equals C. 4 minutes equals a year. So the conclusion is that 4 minutes is a year of life, which is a day for a year formula applied again on itself to treat the day as a year, and then the 4 minutes is as a day to this day, which is a year. So 4 minutes is a day equals a year. We're just applying the 365.25 ratio again. 4 minutes equals a year. It's very beautiful, very elegant, very consistent with the idea as above, so below, that we live in a fractal universe where things are repeated from the macrocosm to the microcosm, that the human being is synchronized, is like a microcosm of the universe. Everything is fractalized down to our little world, and the spin is synchronized. It's just a beautiful, elegant vision of how astrology works. And what's amazing is that the idea that 4 minutes equals a year of life was the basis of primary directions in the Middle Ages. Because in the Middle Ages, they noticed the same thing we noticed. The house cusps, if we move them 1 degree per year, the symbolism of that house cusp hitting that planet matches experiences in the person's life. So they came up with a lot of different ideas for how to make 1 degree from each house cusp equal 1 year, and they knew that the house cusp move 1 degree in 4 minutes, so they said 4 minutes equals a year of life. Therefore, I'm proposing that primary directions are a fractal level of secondary progressions. Is that awesome or what? In other words, we're developing like a theory of everything. Everything is just resonating levels of spin in a fractal universe. Therefore, it's actually 3.94 minutes when you calculate it more precisely. 3.94 minutes is a year of life, and that is the basis of primary directions. So by using this theory, we've come up with an idea for what the accurate formula for primary directions are, and that formula is actually a fractal level, or a second level of secondary progressions. So this is exciting. Now we're coming up with a simple concept to explain how primary directions and secondary progressions are really the same thing. Primary directions are simply a fractal level, an application of a day equals a year on itself a second time. And that's a basic idea. If you're not familiar with the technicalities of fractals, they call it iterative. You apply the function on itself. Anyway, we don't need to get into that. All I'm saying is we have a simple, elegant idea to explain what primary directions are and the accurate way to do them. So I suggest that there are 3 valid ways to progress houses. You can use the time method. So in the Sirius software, for example, when you select a method of progressing the houses, you can select time. That's accurate. That works. The time means a day equals a year. Do not add any other formulas to it. A day equals a year, period. Therefore, the houses will move 1 degree in a day of life instead of a year of life. The only reason we don't want to use the time method is because moving a degree a day is moving so fast that it has very little impact on our lives. It's exactly the same thing that happens if I do transits. If I'm going to forecast what's happening in your life for the next week, I do not look at transiting house cusps. They go by too fast. I only use transiting house cusps if I'm zeroing in on a particular part of the day. They move too fast. Similarly, the progressed ascendant and midheaven are moving too fast. So therefore, number two, it makes more sense to put the fractal progressed house cusps in your secondary progressed chart. Because I really can't use the progressed houses, they're moving too fast. I'll use the fractal progressed houses, which are the most important thing from the fractal progression, or in other words, the primary progressed chart. So I suggest, bottom line, is that if you're doing a progressed chart, go down and select fractal houses. This will give you positions similar to the right ascension in Naibod, as I said before, but they'll be more precisely correct. Okay, and number three, you could select solar arc, which is this third choice here. You can select solar arc because solar arc also works, but it makes more sense, I think, to most of us, and at least to me, to just do your solar arc directions as a separate choice. So up here, you just do your solar arc direction chart. And I will make another video someday on solar arc directions. They are actually a way of finding resonances in a progress chart. I'll discuss that in a separate video. So you could use solar arc, and Dobbins and Blaschke found out that they work. Why do they work for them? Because they work. Noel Teal, so many other great astrologers, over and over again, we see that the solar arc progressed cusps work because solar arc works. But you're going to do a solar arc direction anyway. You can just look at it there. Put the fractal progressed houses in your progress chart so you have houses that move 1 degree per year of life. They have a huge impact and they're important. And don't bother with the time, even though they're useful. The only time you would use that is if you're narrowing down to a very, you're picking a certain week and you want the best day in the week. Then you can narrow down, if you're picking a certain date or something, to use the time. Although I don't use progress charts for electional anyway, because they don't go into the chart itself. So bottom line is, put fractal progressed houses in your chart wheel. Just select fractal instead of Naibod and RA, and you'll get a more precise, accurate calculation of the progressed houses. So what we've done is we've shown that a simple principle can explain all this. It explains why the Naibod has worked well, because it's fairly accurate. It doesn't not tend to time precisely. And we have a very simple and clear idea of how to progress the houses without having to introduce the mean motion of the sun or other extraneous ideas. We have a simple, elegant system that explains how to progress our houses and what the basis of primary directions is. Now, just to look at some examples of this, if we look at the progressed IC for Justin Timberlake, conjunct his natal moon, by solar arc, it happens June 23rd, 2014, when the baby is conceived and 9 months later is born. It's the solar arc, 4th house cusp, that times with the birth of the baby. This is why Zip Dobbins and Robert Blaschke found that solar arc worked so consistently, because it does. Now, what did the fractal time do? It's 3 years later, almost 3 years later, February 20, 2017. It did not correlate with the birth of the baby. It was the solar arc. The fractal time is almost to the day, within 1 week, basically, 9 days earlier, which is trivial by progression, basically, essentially almost exact, when he opens the Academy Awards, which is a great honor. He sings his song, Can't Stop the Feeling. This is a great honor. He's gone to the top of his field, having an impact on all his colleagues, and that's what fractal progressed houses do. They give you impact in the world, and that's exactly what happened. The Naibod in RA is a month later, a little over a month, because he's about 36, 37 years old, I believe, on that date. And so, as I said, the Naibod occurs about 1 day later for each year of life. So about 36, 37 days after is the calculation for Naibod. This is the erroneous, I believe the incorrect date. The more accurate date is a little over a month earlier, which does time very exactly with this major impact that he had in his life. So that's the idea. The other problem with this that a lot of you are aware of is these dates are very dependent on the birth time being exactly right. Birth times can be off 1 or 2, 3 minutes. So it's very difficult to decide which system is the most accurate because we don't know the birth times generally exactly to the minute or to the second. But I want you to understand the concept that fractal time, the fractal progressed houses, give you, I believe, a more accurate calculation than the Naibod, similar but more accurate, and is a better one to use in your chart, and it gives a simple theoretical foundation for how to progress houses and how to do primary directions. And you don't have to introduce some arbitrary new rule for no apparent reason, as you do with things like Naibod and RA. So, okay, this just repeats what I just explained to you. Let me give you one more example of using progressed houses. And we'll take the death of Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was born at 9:30 in the morning, and on the date that she died, which is pretty well documented was a suicide, very oddly her progressed midheaven was conjunct her sun. I say oddly because you would think that progressed midheaven on the sun would be a wonderful thing to happen. So her sun progressed from 6 Taurus to 10 Gemini right on her sun. Should have been a wonderful thing. It was not so wonderful in that she committed suicide. But her sun is conjunct the Uranus-Neptune midpoint with only a 10-minute orb. So here's Uranus at 29 Pisces, Neptune at 22 Leo, Sun at 10 Gemini. The Uranus-Neptune midpoint is 10 Gemini 37, only 10 minutes past the Sun. And, you know, if you're a student of astrology, you know Uranus-Neptune is visionary, wild, unstable, inclined to drug use. She was using drugs. She died of a drug overdose. So it's the fact that her sun is at the Uranus-Neptune midpoint that makes her sun so vulnerable. And when the midheaven conjuncted her sun, it's also on her Uranus-Neptune midpoint. Now, if she was born, instead of on the half hour, this is from a birth certificate, but it says 9:30. If she was born at 9:28, 9 hours, 28 minutes, 15 seconds, then the progressed midheaven is exactly at 10 Gemini 37 when she dies. Most likely it was of suicide. But even with the time of 9:30, it's about a half a degree orb. The progressed midheaven is at 11 Gemini 01. So probably she was not born exactly at 9:30, and I suspect she was born at least a minute earlier to put that progressed midheaven right on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint. And what further can convince us that this is true is, here's the bi-wheel. I've already set it up so I could draw these arrows and make notes on here. Look at where her progressed Venus is. This is incredible. Maybe that's a little small to read, so I'll read it for you. 10 degrees, 35 minutes of Gemini. Her progressed Venus is on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint with a 2-minute orb. It's almost exactly on the Uranus-Neptune. The progressed midheaven is also there. She's in Uranus-Neptune land when she dies. And just to give you a little quote, I'll just read this quote from the bottom of this slide. On her last day of life, Marilyn lolled about her home in a drug and alcohol-fueled haze. This is from a website page. I give the whole page here from pbs.org. I just wanted to read that little quote to you. That the Venus and the midheaven on her Uranus-Neptune midpoint puts her in this alcohol and drug-fueled haze. Didn't have to, but it had to express itself somehow, and it did express itself in this negative way. So midpoints are really important. Midheaven to Sun should be the peak of your career, but being at Uranus Neptune, things did come to a peak, but unfortunately that peak was death um, under the alcohol and drug influence, the Uranus Neptune midpoint. Okay, so these are just examples of why astrologers have believed for many, many hundreds of years that the cusps are somehow moving 1 degree a year of life. They're moving about a degree. Maybe it's just that they move a degree, or maybe it's the solar arc. And what I'm suggesting, my belief about it is, what I see the strongest evidence indicates, is that the cusps are moving by solar arc, they're moving by secondary progression, just 1 degree a day, and they are moving by fractal progression. Those are the 3 ways. Let me go back to that slide. They are moving in 3 ways, by time, fractal, and solar arc. Time is usually not that useful because it's so fast. Fractal is the one to put in your progressed houses, and solar arc you can analyze separately by selecting the solar arc progressed chart. Now we have a beautiful, elegant system. We do not need to introduce any extraneous ideas other than we live in a fractal universe where different levels of spin are synchronized to each other. Period, full stop, that's it, and everything fits together beautifully. And just one last little thing, well, not so little. This is the icing. You ready for the icing on the cake, as the saying goes? This is really amazing. If we look at Marilyn's fractal primary, let me show you what I mean by fractal primary. She died on August 5th, 1962. If I go to progressions, and I will select a fractal primary for August 5th, 1962, now I will calculate a chart where 3.94 minutes equals a year of life. This is the primary. It was usually called a primary direction. I think it's actually a progression. I'll make more videos about this, but let's just cover so much in one video. This fractal primary is the next level of a secondary progression. It's very powerful. So when we select this, we get this second level of progressions, and look what's in this chart: a Moon, Neptune, Saturn T-square. If you're an astrologer, does that sound like it could be alcohol, a loneliness? She's by herself. A friend of hers calls her late in the evening, just kind of sensing something's wrong. And back to midpoint structures, Saturn is conjunct the Moon-Neptune midpoint with a 5-minute orb. Not only is it a T-square, but Saturn is exactly at the midpoint. Conclusion. Let me go back to the slides. Here it is with the slides, and I mentioned this T-square and the Saturn conjunct Moon-Neptune midpoint with a 5-minute orb. The bottom line is this: when Marilyn Monroe died, which appears to have been very strong evidence, it was a suicide. She was drug overdosed. She had also been taking tons of alcohol as well. Not a good combination. She's essentially bringing herself to death when the progressed midheaven is at her very sensitive Uranus-Neptune midpoint. Progressed Venus was also at a Uranus-Neptune midpoint. And this chart is the fractal primary progression, which in this chart, there's a Moon, Saturn, Neptune T-square, with Saturn at the midpoint with only a 5-minute orb. So this is just to illustrate the ideas, how they make sense. If you're an astrologer using Western techniques, you don't need to be convinced of secondary progressions. You're probably already convinced of them, as I am as well. I'm just illustrating to you and demonstrating that it's reasonable to assume at this point that the fractal progressed houses are a more refined slightly more accurate form of calculating the progressed houses as compared to the Naibod. Not so slight if the person is 90 years old. It's going to make a difference of 3 months. If you're doing a company or a country that's 120 or 150 years old, now it's making even a bigger difference. But for most people, if they're in their 30s and 40s, it's about a month different. So uh, the Naibod and RA is not too far off, and that's why it's gone unnoticed. That it was fairly close, and we don't always know the birth time exactly anyway, so we allow some leeway. So it gives us more accuracy with that. It explains the basis of primary progressions, and we see how we can create the primary progressed chart. Well, I'm calling it a fractal primary. It's based on the idea of a fractal of the secondary, so we call it a fractal primary. It's the same basic idea that 4 minutes is a year of life that some of the people in the Middle Ages used. And we see how this also reinforces our understanding of what was bringing Marilyn Monroe to the point of a suicide through overdose. Okay, my friends, I hope you found this interesting and help bring some awareness that because most of us as astrologers just focus on the interpretation, there's not a lot of emphasis on the technical details behind the calculations. We sometimes assume that the calculations are fine. We trust the software. And one thing I want you to know is that sometimes the software is just taking a best guess and fitting whatever astrologers think it should be, and it's not completely convincing. It's not completely convincing that we should progress houses by Naibod and RA, and I'm showing you some very strong indications that there's a slightly better way to progress the houses, which is called Fractal Progressed Houses. It also opens the door to a new understanding of primary directions and a new simple integrated vision of how all these ideas are part of one simple conceptual framework, rather than just introducing new arbitrary ideas into what we're doing. So I think it brings theory and observation much closer together, much more consistent, and removes a lot of the confusion. Okay, my friends, I hope that was helpful. My very last slide here. Oh, I've got some summary of the ideas. I don't think I need to go through the summary. I just summarized all of this. I think that's been all made clear. So my last slide is just some resources. The YouTube channel page, of course. We have an annual vibrational astrology conference. The first one will be April 5 through 7 in 2019. You might be hearing this after that date, so should be every April in Gainesville, Florida. The Kepler and Sirius astrology software that I referred to, here's the website for that. Classes at the Avalon School of Astrology and some classes by Linda Berry, who's also an expert in vibrational astrology, and others who have graduated from a program in vibrational astrology will also be teaching soon. So a lot of resources. I've written many articles, free online book. I wrote 2 books. Lots of resources for learning more about these ideas in vibrational astrology and other progressive ideas that we've developed, such as these new insights into progressed houses and primary directions. Thank you very much for listening, my friends. God bless. Namaste.